Buenos días, estamos aquí con el profesor Ian Parker, que está de visita en México para presentar el último libro que coordina junto a David Pavón Cuellar. Y bueno, pues le agradecemos mucho la posibilidad de platicar con usted, profesor Ian. La pregunta que yo le quisiera hacer, van a ser un par de preguntas nomás, es ¿cómo aborda usted el análisis lacaniano del discurso? Desde la perspectiva de la psicoterapia, que es el tema que usted trabaja en el libro. Esa sería la pregunta que nos interesa ver su propuesta.
I mean, discourse analysis is a way of reflecting on the way that knowledge is constructed and treating that knowledge as sets of forms of language, forms of discourse. And what Lacanian psychoanalysis does is to bring in the question of subjectivity and the construction of subjectivity in those discourses. So we're able to intervene in discourse analysis and to show how the subject is also themselves able to intervene and transform language. It raises a question about the ways in which those subjects connect with each other in a collective process. And it seems to me that Lacanian psychoanalysis is a more useful tool for thinking about that process of forging collective subjectivity than other forms of psychoanalysis.
Perfecto. Bueno, pues esa sería la primera pregunta. El Víctor Hugo Pacheco ahora va a hacerle un par de preguntas que él tiene interés en preguntarle. Le agradecemos, por supuesto, aquí públicamente a la profesora Tania Rocha de la Facultad de Psicología, quien permitió la posibilidad de abrir este espacio.
Buenos días. ¿Qué tal, Ian? Yo quería hacerte un par de preguntas. La primera sería una cuestión un poco básica, pero me parece interesante saber tu postura al respecto. Siempre hay una especie de tensión en cuanto al psicoanálisis lacaniano, si debería acercarse más a un aspecto clínico o si este podría servir como un discurso de crítica hacia la vida cotidiana, ¿no? Entonces, mi pregunta sería ahí, ¿tú cómo asumirías esta disyuntiva?
I mean, I think that, should I take this or you hold it? I think that Lacanian psychoanalysis is based in the clinical practice. And when Lacan gives his seminars, he makes it very clear that he's talking to psychoanalysts and trying to develop the clinical practice of psychoanalysis. But at the same time, this form of psychoanalysis has close connections with the political context in which it was developed. That is the context in France, where there were debates around Marxism, and now there are new debates around the impact of feminism that we also need to take into account. So those political contexts for talking about the clinical practice then connect us with more directly political questions about transformations of subjectivity outside the clinic. And I think the two aspects of this. One aspect is that Lacanian psychoanalysis is a tool to help us to think about the way in which social formations operate. And the four discourses is just one example of a Lacanian tool that we can use to think about social formations. But there's another aspect which is just as important, which is that psychoanalysis itself today operates as a discourse. People use psychoanalysis to talk about themselves, the meaning of their dreams and their childhood and slips of the tongue and so on. And so we have to work within the coordinates of that psychoanalytic discourse if we are to do progressive political work. We need to connect with the forms of subjectivity that are emerging today in the world. And those new forms of subjectivity are themselves heavily influenced by psychoanalysis.
Sí, una pregunta que también te quisiera hacer está un poco relacionada más con una parte de un artículo que tú escribes en el libro que se está presentando, bueno, que se va a presentar hoy, y tiene que ver con el hecho de que tú mencionas una cuestión, ¿no?, que es muy entendida, ¿no?, por aquellos que estudian la cuestión del psicoanálisis, que las categorías lacanianas no son categorías sexuadas, ¿no? En este sentido, las categorías lacanianas o los sujetos, ¿no?, pueden jugar un rol de género independientemente de su sexo, ¿no? Pero una cuestión que se me hace interesante, que tú mencionas, llegas a mencionar en uno de esos artículos, es que la cuestión precisamente del género puede regular las relaciones también entre sexo y clase, entre clase y raza, perdón. Entonces, quisiera ver si nos podrías explicar un poquito cómo sería esta articulación entre género, clase y raza.
I mean, this is a question which is really important today, I think. The way in which the fundamental operation of gender, which positions people either on the side of man or the side of woman, on the side of masculinity or the side of femininity, that fundamental question in the organization of culture then comes to operate to reconfigure relations of class and relations of race. And we can see this, for example, in the rise of the service sector in capitalism after the Second World War, and the rise of the importance of women workers in factories and in the service sector, and a phenomenon that has been discussed by feminists, but is not a form of feminism, is feminization, the feminization of the work process, in which the worker has to be considerate of the employee, the worker has to be considerate of the customer, and has to develop an intuitive, stereotypical feminine relation with the customer, which men then have to correspond to as well. So there's a feminization of work, which then changes the coordinates of collective action and trade union activity. And this feminization also operates ideologically in the representations of the oppressed, of black people, for example, who are either feminized, that is, they're treated as being like women or children, or they're treated as hyper-masculine subjects who are a threat to civilization. So this question of gender is absolutely central to the way that we think about politics of class and the way we think about politics of race today. And in that way, Lacanian psychoanalysis has something to say about the way that the process of sexuation, the allocation of positions of subjectivity, operates around class and also race.
Ian, una última pregunta. ¿Izquierda lacaniana? Marxismo y Lacan, Marx y Lacan, la tradición, Lenin, Trotsky y Lacan. ¿Cómo ves estas relaciones tú el día de hoy? ¿Cómo podría esa tradición revolucionaria, crítica, radical, empalmar con el psicoanálisis en sus distintas vertientes?
I think in terms of the institutions and the history of Lacanian psychoanalysis, I find it very strange to hear about the Lacanian left. I think that it would be more accurate to say that the dominant strands of work are on the Lacanian right. That there's a closer connection between Lacanian psychoanalysis and the conservative wing of politics than there is with the left wing of politics. So that means that we have a real struggle to take Lacanian ideas and to use them in a way that connects with revolutionary politics. The conservative ideas of Lacan are used in relation to gender, in relation now, specifically in Europe, in relation to religion, in the ways in which Lacanian psychoanalysts think about Islam and the ways in which the Islamic movement operates in relation to European civilization. We need to intervene in that and to connect with revolutionary politics, which is able to understand different forms of spirituality, like Islam, and the ways in which they pose questions to psychoanalysis. We need to learn from these new social movements and construct new forms of psychoanalysis. For me, my understanding of Lacan is that in Lacan's development, he was always open to these new political ideas, to the influence of Marxism, for example, then to some of the debates in feminism, then to some of the arguments from Gilles Deleuze. Now we also need to bring in the other arguments to reinvigorate and re-energize Lacanian psychoanalysis and to connect it with revolutionary politics.
Muy bien, pues te agradecemos mucho esta breve entrevista. Sabemos que tienen un compromiso ahora, la presentación de este importante libro, y pues bueno, agradecemos nuevamente a nuestro amigo David Pavón, a Tania, la profesora, la doctora Tania Rocha, que nos abrió en este espacio, y a ti por darnos estos minutos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.